Welcome to State of Ed, a podcast about education inside the classroom and out. My name is Marc Isix.
And I'm Nick Simone.
How you doing today, Nick?
I'm doing well. Happy New Year, Mark. How you doing?
Happy New Year, Merry Christmas. Are we allowed to say that?
Yeah, why not?
All right, let's go for it. Yeah, it's been a while since we've had a chat, and I'm glad we finally were able to put all of our family obligations and the holiday stuff aside and get it in the rearview mirror. And now we're back to business here at the podcast.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this one. I think we got a lot of good things to talk about.
Yeah, well, a lot has changed since last we spoke, and the world has turned a little bit upside down, or swung. The pendulum has swung back to where it had been, which is very typical for the world of education. And of course, I'm talking about the Every Child Succeeds Act, which is the rewrite or the revamp or the reboot of No Child Left Behind. And I would love to be on the committee, the naming committee for these acts, because I think they're really amazing how they phrase these things in such positive ways, and it's pretty remarkable how they manage to do this every single time,
Yeah, they have
regardless of
some.
what the content is.
Yeah, they have some talented spin doctors who use rhetoric quite nicely, or quite effectively, I should say.
Right. So what is the difference between not leaving a child behind and every child succeeding?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot there.
No, I mean just rhetorically.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, it's like when the government changed, Secretary of War to Secretary of Defense. What's the difference?
That's true. It's if they only spent that kind of time and care on crafting a very good bill or a law, then we would be in much better shape. But just a couple of the highlights of this new Every Child Succeeds Act, and some of the things I found interesting. It prohibits the federal government from sort of mandating Common Core, which was the centerpiece of everything that Arne Duncan was promoting and President Obama was promoting. And somehow they're both able to take ownership for being for and against the federal promotion of Common Core, which is another brilliant political maneuver.
Yeah, yet we throw out this phrase "Common Core" as if it's just a one line answer to the program, and I think that's what's frustrating to me so much. Education can't be they want to simplify it, and it's a bigger picture. We've talked about Common Core before, but now they're going to put all that effort into trying to change how classrooms are structured, and now say it's not going to be mandated. Um, I don't know.
Unless your school is in the bottom 5%, and if your school's in the bottom 5%, then the federal government can come riding in on its white horse and save the day? Question mark. Somehow.
And what do we even mean by bottom 5%? Are we talking about graduation rates? Are we talking about standardized test scores? I mean, how do you even come up with that figure?
Well, I think it's my understanding it's a combination of those factors. But then again, I mean, what do I know? They could be changing that, or how do they figure that, and what kind of computations are they relying on to determine which schools are in the bottom 5%? And then if you're in the bottom 6%, but not the bottom 5%, then
You're doing a great job.
you're 1% better, I guess. And all of your children are succeeding at 6%, but at 5% they're not.
I mean,
Uh,
I'll use a school, in our area. I read about Hempstead High School a few days ago and how they're starting to, in January now, implement, smaller academies within the school, which a school as large as Hempstead that struggles tremendously. I think that's a great idea. But then I read at the end of the article that if they don't show improvement by June, that they can be taken over. I mean, they really think 6 months is enough time to implement a strategy like that. I mean, this is a major overhaul that needs to take place. You're not going to see progress in that short amount of time.
I mean, in Manhattan, it takes 6 months to get like a phone and a cable connection. I mean, how are they supposed to revamp an entire school system and get kids to succeed and somehow overcome, months or years of performance that has not been to the level that they had expected or had hoped for? It's so unrealistic. But here we go. I mean, the pendulum again swings one way, and then it goes a little bit too far, and then everyone starts screaming and wanting it to go back the other way. And the analogy that I feel is appropriate is that there's no pragmatic approach to things. It seems like you're standing in the shower and it's too cold. Well, just turn off all the cold and turn on all the hot, and then that ought to solve the problem. And then you wind up having to go and reverse everything that you just did, and then you just wind up going back and forth instead of trying to adjust things incrementally to get where you need to be. And that is just, for whatever reason, they're unable to do that on the federal level. They're certainly unable to do that on the state level. Cuomo now walking back, all of the things that he had demanded, and basically, again, claiming that he's the hero because he was the hero when he implemented it, and now he's the hero that he's calling for things to be, uh, you know, retracted. And I know it's a political maneuver, but it's when you're in the trenches like we are, it's incredibly frustrating, and you lose a tremendous amount of faith, which is why I'm so frustrated with with all these different things.
Yeah, I keep waiting, but the optimistic side of me keeps waiting for some leader to step forward and say, uh, this has been a disaster of a, let's say, 5 or 10 year period. And please, can we go back to education being about challenging students, helping them to overcome obstacles, contributing to them trying to reach for their goals, setting high goals. That's what education is. It's not about numbers. It's not about data. It's not about statistics. It's about helping young people to strive for whatever it is they want to achieve in life. And that may be different for each kid. Of course, it is different for each kid.
But
Um,
for too many, I'm sorry.
yeah, but it's none of this is going to make a difference. We're not going. We're going to keep 5 years from now having the same discussion. I mean, I spent in one class period today helping some of my students get prepared for a midterm. I can't tell you what I learned about three, four, five kids that I never would have known if I just didn't take the time to talk to them. And I think that little in, conversation I had with them is going to make a difference in how they prepare and how they strive to do well in school. And they may not turn it around right now. It may not have, but at some point the light bulb goes on. That's what education is about, and it's just all of this stuff that's taken place. It's lunacy right now.
Right. But unfortunately for the legislators on the federal level, the legislators on the state and sometimes local levels, it's about the semantics. It's about naming things the right name, and being behind the name of things. Uh, I just can't get past the fact that, no child left behind and every child succeeds. It's really, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
What does that even mean with the diversified types of learners that we have, and the students, the incredibly ever growing numbers of students with disabilities that we have? Those phrases, those catchphrases, they mean almost nothing because there's so much at play here that you just can't boil it down to a title like that. And it's so misleading, and it's so unrealistic in so many ways because of the many challenges that exist out there. And I don't even want to get into the socioeconomic argument because I do want to save that for a little bit later on in the podcast. But um, so it just allows them to sort of wash their hands of the realities of things, and just gives us a good catchphrase and something that you can never vote against. And that's really, I guess, the reason why they do it. You just can't vote against the Every Child Succeeds Act. You can't vote against the No Child Left Behind Act, just because. How can you? You're not a patriot. You're not You're not pro-America if you vote, or pro-child if you vote against these types of things based on their names.
Yeah. Well, you said you don't want to talk about the socioeconomic yet, but the reality is that this is all about a country that is just failing to reach poor school districts, areas of poverty, whether it's inner city, whether it's rural America, it doesn't matter. That's the problem. And those schools are going to continue to struggle until we have a completely different approach to how we deal with poverty in our schools.
So that's a great segue into the first article that I know that you wanted to discuss. And that actually speaks to the fact that high schools are almost too successful now, and people are now pushing back, saying that because the number of diplomas that are being handed out has increased so much, that the diploma doesn't mean what it used to mean. In a sense, there's inflation. I'll call it graduation inflation, where the value of graduation has decreased because of the number of diplomas that have been handed out. Not because, of course, simply the number of diplomas, but because of how watered down things have become in order for a student to earn a diploma, and that has led to this sort of watered down lack of, or devaluation, if you will, of the graduation diploma.
Yeah, well, if graduation rates are going up and remedial courses in college are also going up, then doesn't somebody recognize that there's a problem there? And I know in education, everybody always likes to pass the blame to the school level below them, you
Of
know.
course.
But this is one instance where I will say we're at fault on the high school level, because I do think that if we've watered down requirements for graduation, too many kids are not prepared to handle college. Um,
And it's
and
sort of a catch-22 for the
right,
colleges, because while they would love for kids to be more prepared, they're making a fortune
oh,
on these remedial courses because they're non-credit bearing in many cases.
yep.
So kids are paying full price tuition in most schools for these remedial courses, and they're not graduating in 4 years. They're graduating in 5 years or graduating in 6 years. Now, of course, the other side of it is how many of them are even graduating at all.
And when you say it's a fortune for the students, it's also a fortune for the government, because if we're giving financial aid to students and they're not graduating, I mean that's money down the tubes as well.
That's right, and especially now since federal law requires those loans to be paid back even before other forms of debt. So students are on the hook for them whether they can find work or they can't.
Yeah, and I don't understand why we can't have true multiple pathways to graduation. I don't know why we can't have a very rigorous program for students who are, college bound, and have another program for students that want to have, more of a vocational focus. Because I do think that's the solution. It's human nature to take the easy way out. So if we
Right.
want more people to graduate, but we want to have the same standards for everybody, people can talk about raising standards, but you know, the reality, at least for for my subject, is look at a Regents exam from 2015 and look from a Regents exam from 1985.
Right. My only, just to play devil's
Yeah.
advocate, I do like the idea of the multiple pathways. I think what potentially happens is you wind up with certain demographics of people winding or finding their way to these alternative pathways that may or may not involve the same level of rigor and or the same economic opportunities on the other side. And then you wind up with the widening of the gap that you're trying to close. And that is a legitimate concern. But so the question would be, how can you construct a system that will allow you to have those multiple pathways without furthering the biggest problem of all, which is the widening uh, gap that exists between male and female, between ethnic groups, between race.
Well,
Um,
I know what one thing I would want to do, and if we're going to talk about we have limited funds, I would rather hire far more social workers and guidance counselors to help students to
right.
make the better decisions. I think they need intervention and they need to be
Hmm.
guided in the right way. We can't have, schools in the city where a guidance counselor has 600 students. That is
Right.
absolutely absurd. And where would I get that money? Look, I'd rather take the money away from financial aid for students in community college. I know that sounds crazy, maybe, but that's money that we're wasting if they can't succeed there. I'd rather give them the tools and the background, the foundation in high school where they're going to be able to succeed when they get to community college.
And this gets to the very heart of the article that we're talking about, which is, what have we, the collective we, done on the high school level to get these numbers up? Because we were told they had to come up.
Right.
The federal government said they had to come up, and so we could populate these colleges, so we can say that they're moving ahead and that the diplomas are out there and that kids are succeeding at higher levels, when the reality is, what are we doing? What are the factors that are allowing these graduation rates to get so high? In that article, it mentions that 32 states don't even require 4 years of English, but yet they're supposed to be college and career ready when they come out of high school.
Yeah.
There's just so many things that they have done, backdoor ways to earn diplomas through various forms of credit recovery, whether it's called that or not. Um, Giving people opportunities to make up large chunks of coursework in very short periods of time with very low levels of rigor and accountability. And there's so many factors involved. I mean, you have some school districts where the rate of students who come in, rates of immigration in the neighborhoods are so high that they're literally, population changes in the school from day to day, week to week, and that doesn't end as the year, they're transient. So, but yet they're still being held accountable to make certain numbers and get certain funding, and there are so many pressures put on the school, and it becomes a very complicated thing. But there has to be some way to bring more of the accountability and the watering down of the high school diploma. So when it's issued, it still has the same validity and the same weight out there.
I just think, on the local level, schools have to evaluate, how well they can prepare their student body for college. I think because I think our schools are just they're so drastically different. And if we just make it as if, every student is supposed to be college ready when they're 18, I think that's another point. Not everybody's ready at that age to handle the
Right.
rigors of college.
That's
There's
right.
nothing wrong with people going into the workforce for a little while and then going back. We know our junior colleges are filled with people in their 30s and 40s and 50s who want to go back, start school. So I don't know why we have this, this view that you have to go right from senior year of high school automatically to college. I just don't know. I just think we're setting up too many kids for failure.
And that goes back to your alternate pathways argument, because I do think traditionally you go sequentially because there is an increased likelihood that you won't return once you start to get a paycheck and you start to have bills and you start to live on your own and you get used to a certain lifestyle, and then the thought of giving all of that up in order to return to school where you have no income or no legitimate income to sustain yourself, and that becomes very unappealing to people. So they don't want to go there or go back once they start to enjoy things, or they get into a relationship, or they have a child, or and now they can't, and they have to continue to work, and they'll never go back. And so there is some argument to be made for kind of striking while the iron is hot, so to speak.
For some people, maybe for most
Right.
people.
Right.
But I just don't know why everything is. It's always like it's for everybody. We make policies, and every kid is supposed to fit into the same path, regardless of what we're focusing on. And I just don't
Right.
understand that.
So, to its credit, the Every Child Succeeds Act is trying to sort of undo the one size fits all and bring it back to local and community based control, which is where it was, and before it wasn't, before it was, before it wasn't, before it was again. And these are the same arguments and fights that my dad was experiencing when he was an elementary school administrator back in the 70s in Brooklyn and in Crown Heights. And this was the same argument. They wanted more community control and so on and so forth. And so here we are. It's swung back and forth probably two times since then. So there is a cyclical nature to these things. Just at some point, will we learn from our mistakes and not have to just go back and forth and find some middle ground that makes sense, that works, that meets the needs of our kids and our communities, while still ensuring that there are federal levels of accountability, so we as a nation collectively can say that we have an excellent system of education, and not just say we have pockets of districts or regions that are good and while others are lagging.
Yeah. Well, let's save the nationwide evaluation of our school system for for another podcast because there are obviously difficulties in comparing us to other countries in the world. But that'll be for another day.
If we're going back to this community level of control, there was a really interesting situation that happened in New Jersey prior to the recess, where they had a town hall style board meeting, and there was a tremendous amount of fireworks, I guess I should say, at that meeting. Can you just briefly describe for our listeners what had happened at that meeting?
Yes, well, there was a superintendent who kind of set the tone about the level of work that's been given to the students. And the concern is that there's, and we do hear this, I think, quite a bit, that these kids are taking.
Especially with the inflated suicide rates. And
Yeah, but I mean, with all the kids are taking so many AP exams because we encourage them. And I don't know, did you ever read the book, The Overachievers, or have you heard of it?
No.
It's this.
I only do the required reading, which is why I would never read that book.
Well, the author focuses on a suburban school in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and she just follows the kids for a full year. And these are, it's a wealthy suburb, and the kids are all striving to go to Stanford and Dartmouth, and I think it's brought to the attention of a lot of school districts in those type of communities, and because this one in New Jersey was in near Princeton, and there's just a lot of wealthy people who live in the area who want to move to the area so that they can get the top-notch school. And I think the superintendent, David Adderhold, basically told the parents we have to do more to lessen the stress of our students. Now, I mean, you're a parent. I'm sure this is something, you're sympathetic to. And as a teacher, I'm sure you've seen students, and as administrator, seen students who feel tremendous stress as well.
Of course.
But at the town hall meeting, they had a group of parents who were on the complete opposite side of the argument. And they, according to the New York Times, there was from the Asian community a concern that they were going to, I guess,
Dumbed down.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And I there's so much there's so many different facets of this discussion. I just was very intrigued by it. I have strong feelings about the issue, but I'm actually curious which side you would be on first.
Well, what's the difference between the rigor, and what's the fine line between rigor and dumbing it down, I guess is my question. What does the balance look like?
So I did bring this topic up with my students, my AP students, and I do have a diverse group. And many of them applauded the superintendent for being concerned about the stress level, because as juniors, they do feel an incredible amount of stress rate related to the SATs, the changing nature of the SATs, getting ready to apply for college, numerous AP classes. But they also said that for the people
driver's ed.
What's the driver's ed? Did you say? But they also said that by lessening the workload, nobody's holding students back from doing work on their own. And I thought that was insightful because everything shouldn't have to be an assignment. Everything should, if you're a learner, if you're a student, if you're somebody that wants to be educated, education can take many different forms. I mean, look at the work you do with the 21st Century Scholars. I mean, that's not on their transcript as a grade, I don't believe, is it?
No, but it just goes in their application.
Right.
They usually write about it in an essay or something.
Right. So, I mean, I'm always amazed at some of the outside work that my students do. I love when they will send me an article that they found or a video on YouTube that thought would be helpful for class. That's not being graded. But that's still education. It's still learning. You're still broadening. So I understand if anybody's concerned about watering down. I don't see this as watering down. I really don't. I mean, I don't think I've ever been accused of giving a lot of work. I don't think kids ever stress. And yet, I feel as if they're being educated properly and they feel very prepared. So I personally think
But you are giving a lot of work. The difference is that they're engaged in the work that you're giving them, so it doesn't feel like work.
Well, yes, you're right. But I still think it's quality over quantity. I think it's very important to utilize the time in class. Kids need to be engaged, need to be thinking, they need to be, following
But
along.
you put a tremendous amount of effort into making your work relevant and meaningful to them. And so when they have the work to do, they understand why they're doing it. There's more ownership there. They don't have to necessarily buy into everything that you're saying, but they know that there's value there because you attribute meaning to it. That's different than learning something strictly for a test.
Right.
It takes on a completely different complexion in the classroom and outside of the classroom with how they address and interact with the work that you give them and the expectations that you have for them.
But I will say, with the age of the internet and text messaging apps, I get very alarmed when I see kids submitting assignments at, 2:43 in the morning or sending
Right.
me an email at 3:19. And I do ask them. I say, why is it? And they said we just have so much work. We have just so much to do. That's alarming to me. And I keep talking about our comparisons to other countries. I do hope we can do a future podcast because when they talk about the workload in Finland and everybody wants to praise Finland, one of the
Hmm.
key things they say is that the kids have less homework, they're in school fewer hours, teachers have
Hmm.
more time, and they get better results. So I don't know. I don't believe what we're doing is necessarily the most effective use of kids' time. And I really don't know if it's a healthy situation for them.
I think the statistics show that it's not. I mean, look at the suicide rates. Just that alone is alarming. How many kids feel? I forget what the statistic was that they mentioned in the article, but it was an alarmingly high number.
Yeah.
Obviously, anything above zero is too much. But when the numbers start to climb, they're feeling this kind of stress, and coupled with, I truly believe this generation does not know how to cope with things nearly as well as previous generations because there's been a lot of helicopter parenting and other things that we can get into. But so I think when you combine the factors of poor coping skills and increasing amounts of stress, you get a really disastrous and potentially deadly outcome.
Can we also add the incredible number of distractions that are available to them that we did not have to deal with, like a cell phone and the internet and Netflix? I mean, these are realities.
That's right. You can never shut down. I mean,
Right.
someone posts something, you have to like it, or else there's something, or else there's a
Right.
problem. You haven't upheld your end of the bargain in your friendship.
Right. And what's so like perplexing in a way to me is that think of the two articles we're talking about: inflated graduation rates with students who are really not performing or doing a lot of work, and overstressed kids. I mean, we have schools all over our country where kids of the same age, some of them are working until 3 in the morning, and other kids may never have handed in a homework assignment all year. And and
Right.
and they probably going to get the same diploma at the end. That's trouble. That is not a good formula. We're doing something wrong.
Right. That's why we created, or the federal government or federal Department of Education tried to create some type of universal standard, but then it went too far. It was People cried that it was federal overreach, and now we're moving in the opposite direction of that. And that's what I was saying before. Everyone needs to take a step back and let common sense try to win the day. But if you're going to allow common sense to win the day, then you have to really entertain the real problems, the socioeconomic differences from one community to the other, the difference between the quote unquote American mindset versus the immigrant mindset, because typically we're talking about these are either first or second generation communities, like the Asian community in New Jersey that was protesting the superintendent. They have certain expectations about what their children should be doing and what the standards should be in the school system, and probably because there were similar types of standards in the countries and the school systems from where they came. And again, I come back to my original question, which is, what does that balance look like? It's so difficult to sort of articulate what that balance is, because you want it to be rigorous, but at the same time, you want to appreciate the whole child, you want to develop the whole child, but you want to do so without taking your foot off the gas too much and dumbing things down.
Yep. And what is interesting is that book I told you, The Overachievers,
Hmm.
by Alexandra Robbins. one of the characters that is under the most stress is an Asian student whose mother is, I mean, when you read this book, she is absolutely out of her mind.
Like
It,
Tiger Mom?
I think she's Tiger Mom on steroids. It is the kid. We assigned it as a summer reading, and the kids, their comments were just they couldn't. They said they've never seen anything. Although one of the funnier comments from one of my students, lovely girl, we asked them, how did this book make you feel? These are your peers. These are juniors in high school, seniors in high
Hmm.
school. And the girl says, she goes, I really wasn't stressed before I read the book, but now I feel like I should be.
As you see, you're doing more harm than good.
Exactly. So,
When I read the ethnic bias article, I couldn't help but think about a column that Thomas Friedman had written a bunch of years ago now, where he talks about a conversation he had with a teacher who shared with him 3 different parent-teacher conferences that he had. I don't know if you remember this column, but the first one was with, I guess it was an Eastern European family or parent, and they said that the science textbook is no good. If they don't get a better science textbook, they're pulling their kid out of the school. And then the Asian parent came in and said, if you don't get a better math program, we're pulling our kid out of the school. And then the American parent came in and said, Billy is so stressed. He's overworked. He's getting too much homework. Is there any way you can ease it up? He has a piano lesson at 6, and he has, his strength coach at 7, and so on and so forth. And it just showed that the different approach or the different mentality that varying ethnic groups have when it comes to education and what that line is between rigor and too much.
yeah, well, I do remember that article, and congratulations for getting the Thomas Friedman reference in before me for the new year.
Thank you very much.
But I will just say I appreciate what
New Year's resolution accomplished.
but I appreciate his columns as always. But I do think there still has to be a balance. I think that we can absolutely sympathize with the fact that kids are feeling very stressed, but we also need to maintain a certain level of rigor.
So since we're talking about that, we're going into our midterm season now. So that begs the question, should we continue giving midterms? And when I say midterm, I guess what I mean is that very all-encompassing cumulative exam that covers everything from September to now. And in one sitting, typically a double period or some cases longer. And do we continue to administer those types of tests, or do we reevaluate given everything that we've just discussed?
Well, I would say on the upper levels, I do think midterms are useful. I had said to some of my students today that when you go to college, you're not going to have homework every night. You're going to have to balance out. And so there's going to be probably 2 or 3 times during the semester where you're going to really need to focus. And that is midterms and finals,
Hmm.
unless your school decides I know some colleges, they'll do 3 exams throughout the
Hmm.
semester. So I think in terms of just preparing them for that moment, I think they can be a useful tool. I'm not sure if they're necessarily as important on the younger grades. And then as far as them being cumulative, um, I think I think that would be depending on the subject. But I do think it can be a helpful tool.
So then how do we address the parent who says that there's too much, my child's doing too much and is stressed out because they have 4 or 5 midterms in major subjects over the course of the next week or 2?
Well, hopefully schools space them out so that there's nothing else going on. If they're being administered during the school day, then we hope that there's nothing else going on, that other teachers are not asking kids to do any work while there's midterms. Work at home, of course, while
Hmm.
there's midterms in session. And then it just becomes, studying for, each exam at a different night.
Should they be given, you mentioned it, should they be given in class during the instructional day, or should testing time be carved out, similar to how we do our state exams here, our Regents exams? Should they be carved out where the typical instructional day ceases to exist and they simply come in to take their exams and then go home.
I think that really depends on the makeup of each school. You know, you have some schools that are 10 through 12, some schools that are 9 through 12, some schools that are 7 through 12, some schools that are K through 12. So
Right.
I think that's just a logistical thing from each building and how they can deal with it. I would also say, because I'm sensing your tone is that you're not necessarily a major proponent of midterms. Um, I don't.
No, no, I don't. My tone
Oh,
might
did I
be
misinterpret
misleading.
your
Yeah.
tone? Okay. But I would say I don't think it's necessarily the most important. I mean, if somebody said they didn't want to give midterms, it would not bother me. Um, but if it can be a useful tool, you know, look, you
Right.
say, how do you deal with the parent? You know, maybe another option, because I'm a big proponent of this, is giving midterms, but not counting them. And I know that might sound crazy to some people, but why not give kids a test and see what they know without having to study? Because I prefer that kids have learned something without having to just memorize it and forget it the next day. Why not give kids an assessment evaluation that doesn't, you know, work against them, but use it
Hmm.
for them to be self-evaluative and see how much they've, you know, recalled throughout the year.
Right. I do find value in the big test, in the sit down for a double period straight or whatever, whatever it is. Because if we're talking college and career readiness, that is an element of being college and career ready. It's dedicating, it's working very hard for one very important performance, whether it be an exam or a presentation or whatnot. Um, that's very real, and I think you have to train for that, like you would train for any other type of difficult endeavor. So I think there's some value to it. I do agree that there should be some balancing. There should be spacing out. You should try to make it as, I'll say, student friendly as something like that could be. But I do find value in it, and it also gives teachers a great way to assess how things are going and what they're retaining and what they're not. Although that shouldn't be the first time that a teacher is learning, what they're retaining. I do believe in cycling in old
Questions.
questions and making connections to things that have been taught previously. So it's constantly fresh, as opposed to we did that for 20 minutes on September 27th, and now you'll be expected to know it, on January 19th. I think
Yeah,
that's unrealistic
yeah, you
or
see,
unfair.
right. I don't know if I feel equipped enough to discuss what goes on in college. I'm just too far removed from it. But my recollection was that midterms and finals were I never had them on the same day. That they were spaced out. And the other thing that was a reality is that I wasn't in class for 7 hours a day.
Right.
So if you go in and you take a midterm at 8 a.m. for your intro to psych class and you're done with the test by 9:30, you have the entire rest of the day and night to study for your next one. These kids don't have that. They're in
Right.
school until 3:30. They're playing sports, they have games, they have dance recitals. They don't have the time. And I think we have to
That's an excellent
understand that
point.
we want to compare everything high school to college. It's not the same. It's just not. You're not. Is anybody in college for 7 hours of the day? Most kids in college, and they're not going to be able to play sports. They're not going to have all these activities that we're telling them they have to have in order to get into
To get into
college.
college, exactly.
So, I mean, I just think that's a reality. So, I mean, and that's why I do. I mean, from time to time, I assess kids without the pressure. I want to know what they're remembering without having to put that added level of stress on them. And I just think it's really hard to expect kids and that's if they have one test. Now, if they
Right.
have two tests the same day, I mean, when are they? I mean, if they're, it's a simple math equation. If they're in school till 3 o'clock, just say they play a sport. If you're lucky, if you're fortunate, you're home at 6 o'clock. Now, if
Hmm.
you're home at 6, are they allowed to eat? Okay, 6:37, a shower. Now, what time do we want them staying up to? This is why they're staying up all hours of the night. The kids that are the overachievers.
And we want them to do those things and have those extracurricular experiences because there's tremendous value there. So, but you're right, just aren't enough hours in a day, especially the way our school hours are structured currently. But that would require making high school more like college in terms of the hours, and
Right.
that obviously is something that's a lot more challenging to accomplish and probably impossible in many different ways.
Right. Well, of course, because parents do expect their kids to be in school. I mean, they have obligations as well. Parents are working. They don't want to have to, you know, worry about getting their kids places where they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be with us. So giving them time off is difficult also. It's a
That's right.
challenge. There's no question it's a challenge.
Agreed. And we'll make that the final word. We'll very optimistically say it's a challenge and we don't have anything else to suggest. But if you'd like to follow us on the web, you can find us at stateofedpodcast.com, or if you'd like to ask a question, it's ask@stateofedpodcast.com. We're also on Twitter at SOE Podcast, and we have to do some more tweeting because we just don't do enough and use social media enough. So that's maybe one of our New Year's resolutions should be, Nick, is that we get a little bit more involved on the social media side of things.
Okay.
And you can also find us in the iTunes store. Just look for State of Ed Podcast, and you can subscribe to us. So, Nick, it was a pleasure. Sorry it took so long for us to connect, but I'm glad that we did, and a very interesting conversation and enlightening as always.
All right. Take care. It's always good to speak with you, and we'll work on the next one.
Sounds good. Take care.